All right. Well, welcome to this week's campaign catch-up. Joining me today, CBN's David Brody. David, a lot to get to as always, and we're going to start right here. This is just kind of fresh today. Kamala Harris is going to appear on Fox News with Bret Baier. What do you make of this?
Well, this is high stakes. I mean, it could go either way for her. Most people are betting. I think they're betting on the other way, not the good way, based on her track record. We'll see. I mean, Bret Baier is a pretty even-handed guy, pretty fair guy. Yeah, he works on a conservative network, but he's not a flamethrower. So we'll see. We'll see how much pushback he brings, and he'll bring some pushback. But look, she has to. And I think this says everything you need to know, Dan, which is that this campaign is in trouble. And they know it. And we get into the polling on that and explain why. But the truth of the matter is she's kind of forced into doing this. She didn't really want to do any interviews, let's be honest, to begin with. She started doing a couple, and now it's gone so poorly that she has to now step up to the next level. And that's where we're at this point. And that tells you everything you need to know about the state of her campaign right now.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that CBS interview in a few minutes. There's calls growing for that to be the full version of it to be released, right? And so everyone's wondering what in the world was said there. We'll get to that in a minute, but let's talk about that polling that you mentioned and the concerns there from the Harris campaign. What are you seeing that's happening in the polls right now?
It's really bad, Dan. It's like, seriously, it's really bad. And this is not me talking just to kind of give a spin or whatever. There's no spin here. This is the raw data. And it's not just raw data from this latest NBC News poll or a Times Siena poll. This is pretty much every poll is showing the same thing. And what I'm talking about specifically are trend lines. Her favorability rating is sinking. In 1 month, less than a month, actually, it went down from 48% to 45%. 46% to 43%. My bad. I'm sorry, I'm getting all my numbers confused. The bottom line is it went down 3%. Yeah. That's not good. You're going in the wrong direction. Trump's favorability actually going in the other direction. Hers going in a negative way. But there's a whole lot more to unpack here. Here's the problem. And I just want to geek out for a second and just read you a couple of numbers. And I'll try to be brief because I know it can get a little, cumbersome. But I want to make sure everybody has these numbers or has these correctly. Now, let's just talk about Black men ages 18 to 44. Harris needs these folks, clearly. Obama had 81% of that group, 18 to 44. He won, his margin of differential. In other words, he won by 81% over the Republican Mitt Romney at the time. He won 81%. In terms of the differential. Then came Hillary Clinton, and she had a differential of 63% among that. So you've gone from 81 to 63%. These are Black men ages 18 to 44. Biden went down to 53%. So now we're at 81, 63, 53 hike. And then Harris comes in at 41%. The Democrats have gone from an 81% advantage among Black men 18 to 44 with Obama, 81%, down to 41%. They've lost 40% of that vote. Now, what does that tell you exactly? It tells you a couple things, and we'll get into. And look, the same thing is going on with Hispanic men. The same thing is going on with all different subset groups. Here's the point: the Obama coalition that Democrats would love to build again, not happening. It won't happen. Trump is doing much better with Black men. He's doing much better with Hispanic men. He's doing much better with all sorts of the rural, the college, or excuse me, the non-college educated voter. This all used to be Democrat territory. It's now flipped, totally flipped, and Trump is doing well. The only area that Kamala Harris is doing well in is college educated voters, specifically white college educated voters. She's actually doing better than Biden did 4 years ago. That's her hope, Dan. So let me just distill all of this, and I'll distill it in one sentence. If she can win college educated white voters by huge numbers and abortion becomes an issue in this election, like number one, number two, she's probably going to win. That's going to be very difficult. But that's the path. That's her only path, Dan. She will not be able to get the same amount of Black vote, Hispanic vote, Asian, or excuse me, Arab American vote. I don't know if we talked about the Arab American vote. Donald Trump is leading in the Arab American community with the vote there. That's going to hurt her in Dearborn, Michigan, and places like that. So if you just go down across the board, she's got to totally recreate the electorate. She's got to totally recreate a new Obama coalition, a Kamala Harris coalition. And like I said, it's going to have to be white, college-educated voters that come to her rescue. Otherwise, she's toast.
Yeah, and I'm looking at the battleground states here, David, and obviously they're all still very, very close. That's why they're battleground states. But you're seeing them inch right now towards Trump. Every single one of them, except for Wisconsin, which is still at only a 0.3 plus for Harris. So still obviously, and all of them are very neck and neck here. But Arizona, Nevada, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Georgia. Remember, when Biden withdrew, Trump had a pretty big lead, of 4.5-point lead in these battleground states. But right after they drew, we had that, fomentum sort of thing happening right after that, where a lot of the media were sort of excited about that. And now you're even seeing on CNN.com today, they're saying, well, Harris is struggling to get this momentum back. So even when CNN is pointing it out, that should tell you something, because right after Biden dropped out here, Trump had that it was a 2.5-point lead over Harris. That gap instantly within a couple weeks narrowed to neck and neck, and she inched up a little bit, but now it's kind of flipped here in the last couple weeks. And in the last couple days, it's started to inch forward towards Trump.
This is feeling, Dan, like a repeat of what she did in 2020 when she ran for president. She came out as kind of like the candidate with a lot of momentum, a lot of energy. Everybody's like, oh, wow, here comes Kamala Harris. She's got presidential material written all over her. And then it was like, after about a couple of months, it was womp womp, and she was out of the race before there were any votes. And we're seeing the same thing develop. It was a lot of hope and joy and vibes, and now everybody's looking at her going, I don't know about this. And so this is the problem for her specifically. And look, here's another problem for Democrats. And of course, that means Kamala Harris writ large, which is that party registration is way up for the Republicans in these battleground states and down for the Democrats. Nevada, North Carolina, Arizona, Georgia. There are certain battleground states that don't keep track of party affiliation. Actually, I'm sorry, I think Georgia is one of those that does not keep track. The point is that in some of those battleground states, and just overall in the country, Republican Party registration is up, Democrats are down. That's another big problem. And one last thing to just say about the narrative. Look, one thing I've learned in politics over 20 plus years, actually it's been about 25 years or so, when the narrative sets on you, it's over in a good way or a bad way. With Obama, it was a good way. Hope and change. He rode that to the nomination and the presidency. Kamala Harris, we're starting to see what happened with Saturday Night Live over the weekend. They went with the middle-class kid again, right? I mean, there was this big skit. I don't know if anybody's seen it, but it was a Family Feud skit. Dan, did you see it?
I did. And you made the Obama comparison. And what I was going to point out, the difference here, and I think it's notable, is you're talking about these SNL bits, and you're right. She was on there again, and they were making fun of her for constantly going back and answering any basic question as saying, well, I grew up a middle-class kid. It had nothing to do with what she was being asked. Remember, SNL never went after Barack Obama. They actually said that comedians went on there and said, we just can't find anything funny about him. Now, the thing with Obama, he did ride hope and change, but whether you agree with him or not, there was substance behind him. He's right. Clearly an intelligent man who understands the policies, so he could explain that. And perhaps that's the disconnect here, is that Harris has not done an effective job of sort of explaining the positions. And
that's the point, right? That was really the point of the SNL skit, because when she started to say, I'm a middle-class kid, I grew up as a middle-class kid, you heard Kenan Thompson, who was playing Steve Harvey, go, as the character, he's like, oh, here we go. Like, in other words, that's the running joke. And the running joke has now become the narrative. And what's the narrative? The narrative is there's no substance there. There's no there. That if you're going to trot out the middle-class kid, you've done it so much. Aspiration and dreams we talk about here. It's the same thing. If you're going to do that, she's gone to the well too much, Dan. And because she's gone to the well, even SNL is picking it up. And the reason I'm bringing up SNL is it's important because that's a cultural landmark. It's not just media, but it's cultural. And it gets picked up on social media, and it starts to define how a candidate is. And here she is, and it's not good.
Yeah. And, speaking of the media here, just continuing on that, over the weekend, we had some viral clips, including this J.D. Vance going on ABC, I believe, with Martha Raddatz, and she's asking him about the Venezuelan gangs, and she tried to spin it off. And Vance has been he's had several of these moments where he's kind of had a good job of sort of turning it back on them. She's saying, oh, it's only been a few instances of these, apartment complex being taken over. And he's like, are you kidding me? Or do you hear yourself? Only a few instances? I'm not a big fan of Venezuelan gangs taking over any American apartment complex. And I think that is really shocking to people, those sorts of things. And I think Vance in particular is doing a good job of pointing this out to the American people. Hey, here's things that we're dealing with, the economy and everything else. And he's kind of making them look foolish at times. And it's an interesting 1-2 punch, David. I'd like your reaction to this, because Trump, meanwhile, has been showing his personality on some of these more popular podcasts and things of that nature. And you're seeing that side of him, which is, the affable side of Trump. And then you have Vance sort of just laying in on these media folks who, have been engaged in sort of this sort of spin. So it's an interesting 1-2 punch.
Yeah, and you have to wonder what the ABC News editorial meeting is on Monday morning. Why did we have J.D. Vance on again, embarrassing one of our anchors? I mean, that had to be the question. No, seriously, it's just becoming like commonplace now. He goes on there and just destroys them. ABC, CNN, take your alphabet choice. He does it. But what's interesting to me on that Martha Raddatz exchange is that it goes to the mindset of not just the liberal media, but a lot of his critics that never really get Trump, right? In other words, what they keep saying is, let's talk about how bad he is. Let's talk about Orange Man bad. Meanwhile, Venezuelan gangs are taking over apartment complexes. And the common person out there just looks at that. I'm not talking about the person that doesn't like Trump or doesn't hate Trump. Either way, just like generic person out there that just wants to go about and live their life and doesn't give a crap about, I said it, but doesn't give a crap about politics. I'm just being real. And just looks at it and goes, yeah, I'm not a big fan of Venezuelan gangs taking over apartment complexes, rather than everything's Trump's fault. Global warming is Trump's fault. Everything is Trump's fault. It was worn out in 2016. 2020 happened. That was obviously a COVID situation. It was kind of crazy. And now we're back to 2024. And answering your question about the viral stuff and Donald Trump doing different demographics and groups, let me talk about that for a quick second, Dan, because I think this is really, really important. Let's start with this. Donald Trump won the mail vote in 2016 by 11 points. It was tied in 2020. That hurt him, clearly. He lost 11 points in the mail. He's now up in the latest poll by 16 points. It's starting to look like 2016 again. Okay, so my point of saying all that is he's doing a lot of podcasts to appeal to young men. And I think that's the point. Now, spinning off of that from young men, look, I cover, as you know, here at CBN, faith and politics. And do I want Donald Trump to do an interview with me or CBN? Absolutely. Do I want him to do more evangelical interviews or events? Absolutely. He has not been doing much of that. He's done some, but not much. And compared to 2016, it's night and day. Why? Because Donald Trump politically kind of understands it. He's got evangelicals. He does. Now, I'm not saying all evangelicals, and I know there are a lot of evangelicals that will hold their nose and vote for Trump, and I know there's evangelicals out there that will say absolutely no way. Got it. But that's a minority. Overall, he has evangelicals. He didn't have them in 2016. He needed to prove himself. Then he became president and proved himself. So now he doesn't need to reach out to evangelicals as much. He needs to broaden the tent, not philosophically, not being more moderate, not being more liberal, but broadening out the demographic tent. And that's what he's doing this time around. That's why you see him on podcasts with the Nelk brothers and all these other. He's trying to reach a different audience to increase his numbers with men and other demographics because he knows he has evangelicals already. Honestly, it's politically smart. I'll be honest with you. It's politically smart.
Yeah. And then you've seen the Harris campaign. There's been some interesting narrative sort of ads coming out. There was one I saw that featured a bunch of men, and it was sort of, I don't know if you've seen this one,
Yeah,
David, sort of the tough guy men trying to basically say that they're tough guy men and they're voting for Kamala. So what did you make of the purpose of that ad?
Well, I thought it was cringeworthy, first of all, but in terms of the purpose, look, they're trying to, this is a fight to basically win the male vote. And to be clear, a win for Kamala Harris isn't winning the male vote. But a win for Kamala Harris is to blunt some of Trump's numbers. And so what she needs is not the alpha male crowd out there that's rah Trump and testosterone is oozing out of the veins. She's not getting those folks. But she's hoping to get the more, as what she in the campaign would say, the more sensible, the more emotional man, the man that's more reasoned, that time, so this real men for Kamala was aimed at that once again, to do two things. One, to get that number for Trump down by getting out more of those type of men to the polls, because that's the only way she can win. She's got to cut his number down on the mail vote.
It's an interesting message, and to have to correspond with what the Biden and Harris administration have messaged a lot, which is generally speaking that white men in particular are essentially the problem. It's much of the problem throughout America. We've heard that message a lot. It's related to a lot of the DEI stuff that's going on, right? It's like, where does the problem come back to? It comes back to these white men and their positions of privilege, et cetera, that whole conversation. So they spent a lot of time in that lane, and then now they're trying to come around and say, you know what, guys, we need you. So it might be a tough road to hoe there.
It may, but remember, I think they're really going for more of the moderate, progressive men out there, which don't necessarily hold those views that you just said.
Right.
And they're not going for the toxic masculinity crowd, and I put that in air quotes, they're not going for those type of people. So there's that. Also, what's really important, Dan, to just one last thing on the electorate, this electorate, like none other before, is totally shaped by education and gender. It's split along those lines. Non-college voters overwhelmingly going for Trump, 36%. He's got a 36% lead on non-college educated voters. White, as we've talked about, white college educated voters or just college educated voters overall, Kamala Harris is leading and doing much better than Biden was. So that's the education gap. And on gender, it's the same thing. Kamala Harris leading among women, Trump leading among men. But to be clear, I don't want to geek out too much, but Donald Trump is losing by about 14 points or so to Kamala Harris on the woman vote. Well, he lost to Hillary Clinton by about 15 points in 2016 and still won. So he's actually a point better against Kamala than he was against Hillary. So, there's that to be. Anyhow, there's a lot of numbers to sift through, and my brain's about to explode.
Well, yeah, and you touched on a lot of them, and we'll be back here again later in the week to go through them some more. But as we keep saying, every couple of days, there'll be a lot to chew on. And David, I appreciate you breaking it down here for us today, and we'll see you later this week.
Sounds good. I feel like I lost some weight on this podcast based on the fact that I exercise so many mental muscles. Not that it was coherent, but I did exercise.
Good. Health. That's our first and foremost priority here. So, David, appreciate it.
Again. Yeah, you bet.